Good evening. Please stand. Good evening. So a couple of things before we get started. This is not about taxes. I know some people here were for a tax meeting with, across the hall. I know some people already left. The other point I'd like to make tonight is not a public hearing. Everyone's welcome to be here, but you will not be heard tonight. There'll be ample time for us to schedule a public hearing when the time's right for that. The other thing is I'd like to modify the agenda, if that's okay, assuming that Willow Wood and the Homeland Towers might take a little bit longer than the other two, if that's okay with everybody. And if the other people are ready to go, if there's no objection to that. Is that fair? Okay. So I'd like to start off with call Tim, 232 East Lake Boulevard for reapproval of site plan. Good evening.
How are you?
Great.
Good. We had just a proposal to reiterate the approval process that we had approved last year.
Okay. Mike?
Yeah, they came in front of the board a while ago to do a boathouse and a dock and parking and a few other things on the property. And then they decided not to do the boathouse. They're just doing the parking and the dock. So I have no comments on this.
Rich?
So as Mike explained what the project was, the engineering department does not have an objection to the extension of the site plan application for this project, as long as there were no additional changes being made to the site other than the ones that were previously approved.
Pat?
And, Mr. Chairman, no objections. We would carry all the previous conditions of approval with this reapproval, if you choose to do that.
So I was out there today. Which property is it exactly? It's right across the street from the church?
If you have, it's across from the church, if you had the prayer garden,
Yes.
then there's a smaller piece next to it, and they were next to that.
Okay, I know exactly where you are.
Correct.
I was just curious. I was out there. Anybody from the board?
No, just if we could get them to clarify that there were no changes.
The what, I'm sorry?
There were no changes proposed,
No
right?
change.
And is the intention to do it this year? Is the intention to do the work this year?
I hope so.
So just the only change is not building the boathouse.
Correct.
Do we need a revised plan for that?
We have the revised.
We have the revised, okay.
If there's no further questions, we need a motion.
I'll make a motion, Mr. Chairman, for reapproval of site plan for Carl Tim, 32 East Lake Boulevard, tax map number 65.17-1-15.
That'd be for a year, correct?
Yes.
Second?
For 1 year.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Have a great night.
Robert Pazzi, 229 Sheer Hill Road. Mike?
Yeah, the applicant added fill to the rear of the property to level off a steep drop-off. Realized he needed approvals, stopped, and I believe he's going to be bringing in a little bit more fill now. I have no comments on this application.
Rich?
Jack, is there fill on the property already?
There's some fill been pushed around,
Uh,
not much.
I didn't see that, and my comments do not, so I want to let the board know, I did not see that as part of my review, and I would have a different set of comments, but pretty much the same set of comments that I have now. So this involves the regrading and leveling of a backyard located at 229 Sheer Hill. The applicant intends to bring in 500 cubic yards of fill, and the overall disturbance of the project as submitted is 10,500 square feet, which is above the threshold criteria for the disturbance of New York State Environmental Conservation Stormwater Regulations. Therefore, development of a stormwater pollution prevention plan is required. However, it must only include erosion and sediment controls. Some generic comments: location and limits of the disturbance of the site should be provided. All fill brought to the site must be certified per New York State DEC regulations, and manifest as such of the fill material should be provided. My comment that I would have made for the fill that's there already is that there will be sampling required for this. So I just want the board to know that, and the applicant to know that some samples need to be collected for the existing fill. The location access for how the fill will be delivered to the site must be provided. Various plan information required pursuant to 156, section 15643, town code is lacking. It includes assessment of runoff from the site so as not to cause erosion, landslides, or increased runoff. Location of the portion proposed to be disturbed and its relation to natural watercourses within 300 feet. An inset map may be provided. Existing and final contours, which show the final slopes no steeper than 1 foot vertical and 2 feet horizontal, and details of any drainage systems proposed to be installed and maintained by the applicant.
Pat?
And there are no site planning issues with this, Mr. Chairman. It's all about the engineering as Rich described.
Comments from the board?
Maybe just describe what you're doing for us, Jack.
Yeah, he has a backyard that is somewhat leveled and pitches steeply to the woods in the back. We propose to build a short wall, let's say 4 feet high, so that he can level it without going over the property line. It's about 500 yards of fill he's going to bring in. He has placed some fill there in the past couple of years, not minimal amount of fill. There is an area disturbance on here. I showed the stream that's back there, and we're far enough away from the stream. I have all the wells within 100 feet, 300 feet rather. Can we set this for a public hearing? Do we need a public hearing?
What's the wall construction going to be?
It's just going to be a fieldstone wall, large boulders.
Like just a loose ball?
Yeah, Mr. Pazzi's in the construction business, so he has access to these things. And the access is going to be through his driveway and around the side of his house where he's been doing it. You know, bringing material back there in the past or bringing vehicles back there. He's got a pool back there.
The one thing that we need to make sure is that the fill that he had previously brought in is inspected, as well as the fill that's coming in.
Sure, yeah, we'll get a
Prior to
manifest.
coming, because we had an issue not too long ago that we literally had hundreds of trucks pulled out to
Take it
fill.
out.
So we don't want to put you through that,
No,
you
no,
know. But under no circumstances can that come in without being inspected first.
Well, you've been through a few of these now, so
Oh,
you
yeah,
understand
right, yeah.
the criteria. We have that whole thing written up
Yeah.
on what the fill has to be, right?
Exactly.
Manifest and all that good stuff.
yeah. Can we waive the public hearing?
No.
No.
Okay. Can we schedule it?
Yeah, as long as you meet the conditions set forth by the consultants, we can
Yeah,
in
we will-
parallel schedule the public hearing.
Okay.
Can we get the soil tests done
That-
before, yeah,
that's- yeah.
before the public hearing?
Soil test on the existing fill?
Yeah, because, I mean, we may be in a position where we have to remove that fill. We don't know
Right.
that until we test it.
Okay. All right.
And the additional information on the drawings that was requested.
Yeah,
So
Whatever,
that-
whatever
when
Rich
we
is
come
all
to-
right. You're familiar with it, you
Yeah.
know.
Okay.
So prior to the public hearing, let's ensure that he has proper documentation. If not, we'll cancel the public
Yeah,
hearing.
just
So you are going to schedule a public hearing? I can get the sample
Yeah.
yeah.
next week. All right, good, thank you.
Okay.
That's it.
Sorry? Yeah. Pat, you'll schedule, you'll tell Rose?
Yes.
Thank you. Yep. Willowwood Country Club?
George Calcanini, I'm one of the officers of Willowwood Country Club.
Mike?
Yeah, my first two comments are the same. The applicant added 14-station sporting clay range to the existing Willowwood Country Club. The previous application was approved as a country club. Country clubs are permitted by right in the R residential zoning district. I received numerous complaints about shots from people along Union Valley Road mainly. The parking layout is being developed according to the designer, and until that happens, I don't know how many exact parking spot variants they will need. Once we get that number, we'll know. And I highly recommend that all the board members go out there at some point and take a look at this, just so you can better understand exactly what's going on there.
Rich?
So as Mike mentioned, this is approval for the 14 clay stations that have been installed. We've provided comments. The applicant has addressed the majority of the comments. We recommended that permits from the Environmental Conservation Board be provided. They've acknowledged that. They're gonna work with this department to determine if the requirement is needed, as the wetland delineation validation from the New York State DEC is still in process. They will need a permit, stormwater construction activities. They've acknowledged that. They will acknowledge with the department to get a stormwater maintenance agreement, which was a prior comment. There will be a performance bond needed. I know that they wrote in their letter that they don't. They will need it for the erosion sediment control and stormwater management practices. So that is something that's going to be needed there. Existing parking spaces must be shown on the drawing. The applicant has acknowledged this comment, will submit information in subsequent submittal, and wetland limits must be shown on the drawing. Again, we're waiting for the wetland delineation from the New York State DEC.
Pat?
And Mr. Chairman, the applicant has addressed many of our comments from the initial memo. The primary issue with respect to this application is the fact that the sporting clay course is a different use of the facility than it has previously operated, and it's in a different location. So part of our initial comments required the applicant to provide us some more clarification with respect to how the facility would be used. And they made a point of indicating that this is going to be a premier sporting clay facility. So that simply raises the question of whether or not the facility will be used more intensely than it is today. So the applicant has indicated that currently they have 202 family members, and they would anticipate that number being 250. Not sure if that involves the sporting clay course operating at full capacity. Are there tournaments that would operate at the facility? Does it change the use of the facility? So that's really kind of the fundamental question we need to know with respect to how that western portion of the property would be utilized. They have clarified the buffer between the nearest residents. They've supplemented the landscaping plan to address that separation. The trail that traverses the course, the nearest portion to the nearest neighbor, does not include a shooting station. It's simply trail at that point. So that point's been clarified. They've clarified the details of the construction of the trail, as Rich and Mike indicated. They have provided the stormwater plan. So they've addressed most of those other issues that were outstanding from the previous memorandum.
Board questions? Let me just do this first. Let me ask you to give us an overview of what you're planning there. I went out there today, but no one was shooting, so I couldn't hear or see anything. But can you take us through the project?
Right, well, what the course is, it's sporting clays, which is a sport that came to the United States from England in about 1975. It is designed to mimic the flight of game birds, so that it's very varied, as opposed to skeet and trap, which are very regimented. The targets in skeet and trap are always the same, no matter where you go at any course in the world, they're the exact same targets. Sporting clays is different because it trains the shooter to have to adapt and read targets and instantly determine lead. A lot of different techniques that are used because the targets can be doing anything. They can be going away, they can be quartering away, they can be crossing, they can go straight up, they can be dropping, they can be rolling all across the ground. So it's a sport that requires a high level of skill. And because of the terrain at this facility, it allows us to basically mimic any target presentations from anywhere. There tends to be regional styles. The Europeans tend to shoot with a lot of terrain. People down south and out west, very flat areas. We can duplicate that, all of those stations. So the shooters at our club, we tend to have a lot of competitive shooters, and having this facility, what I'm talking about is premier facilities, we can train for any event coming up. And that's the beauty of this as a recreational asset to this entire area. We can train elite shooters. And that's the point of this, that we can have a facility that not only caters to lower level shooters, but we can also cater to the elite shooter, the competitive shooter. And that's something we are trying to build into this area, and we've started a youth program. We're encouraging younger people to come in. We have a youth coach that trains the young shooters on Sunday mornings, and that's the idea of having terrific facility to train here in the town.
When you pull into the facility, it looked like there was shooting ranges on the left.
When you come in, on the left,
Was existing, right?
those are the
Where
existing
will-
trap fields in the 5-stand.
Where will the sporting clays be?
It's on your right. When you
You
came
gotta
in, the
go up.
first building is the Pistol House.
Okay.
And to the, just before the Pistol House is the cart path
Okay, I saw that.
up onto
Yep.
the hill on the right.
Okay. Questions?
So there's a cross-country type of a thing as opposed to the trap and skeet, which is the
Correct,
focus-
those are
focus.
stationary facilities, and
Right.
part of this allows the variety, which is crucial to the sport of sporting clays.
Right.
You want to be able to go out, a typical round of sporting clays, competitive round of sporting clays is 100 targets. 6 or 8 targets per station, so we have 14 stations out on the course, and particularly with the terrain that we have, you can throw an unlimited variety of targets to help train the athletes.
Do you anticipate that this facility being a premier facility, where's the next nearest one that would have this similar type of?
There's nobody really in our area that has the type of terrain that we do. The nearest one, though, that has a lot of competitive shooters working at is over in New Paltz,
Okay.
Mid-Hudson Sporting Place. To a lesser extent, you have Orvis up in Millbrook, Orvis and Denota in Millbrook, but they don't really cater to the
Okay.
the tournament shooter, the competitive shooter. They're more the recreational shooter.
Okay, then if I may, do you anticipate that this venue would be used for competitive events where people would be coming from longer distances and so on and so
We
forth?
would, at most, and we've talked about this, at most 4 times a year.
So that's a higher intensity use, I would think, on those days, right, than typical?
We would have more shooters on those days. It's 4 times a year, at most.
And I guess there's still a question of parking, right, to be sufficient for however many that might.
There's, working on that, I
Okay.
believe, right?
We are working that, and the building inspector has indicated under the code that because we are talking about potentially increasing our membership to 250 from the current 202, he indicated that we would require 502 parking spaces. That is so far above our needs. I've actually prepared a chart, and I've been keeping track of our number of cars in our lots on an hourly basis. We have our employee going out every hour, filling out a checklist, and I've graphed that out just for my own purposes. And the most that we have done on any one day, I've charted in the blue being the highest count. You might not be able to see that, and the red being the lowest. The highest number of cars at any one time since I've been doing this on February 14th until March 21st was 31 cars, and that was on 2 days. The rest of the time, the high count was far below that. And we are continuing to do the traffic count on the hourly basis, and we'll have that information for the ZBA. And we would like to get a referral, since we know we're not going to come anywhere close to the 502 number. We ask that we refer to the ZBA to pursue that. And we will have the parking layout finalized probably next week, maybe.
I think, you're looking at a period of time when shooting is probably not at its maximum. You're probably gonna see more people coming when the weather gets nicer, late April, May, June. The question here is, when your members arrive, do they have to check in? Do they swipe a card or anything like that?
Well, under our procedures, they're required to check into the office. We have an employee on the desk, and they're required to check in before they go out. No, they don't have to get the card, because we have a system called the long-range system, so you can pre-buy your targets on the card, and they're loaded on a card with an RF chip, so that when you go to the station and put it into the machine and hit the button, it automatically counts down off the card. So you wouldn't physically have to go into the office to do that, but as a safety requirement, we want to know who's up on the hill. So we require that of our own. You have to check in and
The reason why I ask is I was wondering if there was a way that you can check membership activity during the warmer season. In other words, your own records may indicate how many people come on a given Saturday or Sunday, and you could use that data to help us understand, you know, the activity and perhaps, you know, present it to Mike and say, you know, here's what our actual membership is versus, total members versus the people that come on any given day.
Yeah, because the code is written for a golf course. Let's face it, that's basically what it's written for.
And in fairness to the code, right, most of the applicants that come here a lot of times have to go for parking variance.
That's
It's not
correct.
uncommon, right, for us to refer to the zoning board for parking variances, that's for sure.
I'm just offering a suggestion, that's all.
We could give you a count of that. It's a lot harder to do it, whereas Mr. Canaz's point was about the parking and the actual physical count of the parking. And we're gonna continue doing that. The car count, I think, is better addressed that way. But if you want that, I can go into the system and pull that out. It's a little more work, but I can pull that out.
I'm just offering a suggestion that it might be something,
Because,
you know.
to his point, in the end, you don't wanna do something that you're gonna have a parking issue later, right? Whatever it is, we wanna figure it out now and do it right. I did have the opportunity to go up there and I would recommend everybody, go and maybe call ahead. I was lucky to call ahead and, the guys, you know, they drove me around the whole thing in a little cart there. It was a little chilly, but, it's an impressive place. It really is. And it's not something you know, when you think country club, you think country club and golf course, but essentially it's pretty similar in a lot of ways. It's a very nice facility. It seems to be very well kept. And I do believe it's an asset to the community, I will say that. You know, you gotta work out your parking, and you gotta work out your noise with your neighbors, right? You wanna be good neighbors. The bottom line is we don't wanna create, you know, we don't wanna create issues for, well, any of us, right? When this is all said and done, it's gotta be done the right way. That's all I ask. And, but all in all, I think you guys are doing it nice. It's a very nice facility. It's worth it's nothing you could think of it in your mind. You have to kinda go there and see what it's about. And the technology in these little booths is, it's remarkable, really. It's pretty cool stuff, pretty cutting edge.
I think it would be beneficial for the board if you also, I do shoot, so it is a very controlled environment. I think you should walk the board through the safety aspect of it.
Absolutely. And I've got a lot of expertise on this. I'm a level 1 certified instructor. I'm also a national delegate to the sport. I represent one of the national delegates representing the state of New York, the governing body of the sport. Got a lot of experience. I'm a master class shooter myself. And one of the things that's, the key in things actually, make sure, first and foremost, that everybody's safe. And I believe we gave you my diagram of the cages, the shop drawing that I did for the cages. A cage is, first and foremost, a safety feature, because the vertical post and the horizontal above and the horizontal in front of you control the muzzle of the gun. So that, and by the way, nobody's allowed to load a gun until the muzzle of the gun is over the horizontal bar. So now, if your gun is over the horizontal bar in the cage, even if you have an accidental discharge, it's going downrange and it's going to be safe. Nobody's going to get hurt. Second of all, the verticals and the overhead prevent people from going out of the range of the field of fire. So again, we're protecting any accidents from occurring in that sense. We also have quite a few certified range safety officers at the club, myself included. And part of the function of a certified range safety officer, if they see an unsafe behavior going on, that behavior is going to be stopped right then and there. And we're trained how to deal with an unsafe situation if it crops up when somebody's got a gun in there. Other things we have, you know, there's absolutely, positively, if you've had one sip of alcohol, you are not allowed to touch a fire. We have lots and lots of rules. For instance, in terms of shot size, nothing larger than 7.5 shot is allowed. Now, some people that don't know may think that the bigger the number, the bigger the shot. That's not it. The smallest that somebody would use in the sport is number 9 shot. Those are actually the smallest pellets. 8s are the pellets are a little bit bigger, 7.5s are a little bit bigger. And the significance of that, limiting it to 7.5s, is it limits the range, how far they can go. So all of that is built into the design of this course, preventing any accidents from happening if somebody were to use buckshot or something. That would be strictly prohibited because the ballistic range is too far.
You're all also requiring target range loads and not high velocity.
Correct.
With regard to, in part, the safety issue, is there a limit to how many people can be on the course at one time?
There's 14 stations, and we don't allow squads of bigger than 6, so, by the way, we've never come close to that. So 14 times 6 would be 84. Well, that would be the maximum you could ever have on the course. And
Because that in some ways may speak to the number of vehicles. If you had an event and it was full, right?
Yeah,
So,
but that's,
outside.
we never even come
That's-
close to that.
Yeah.
What would be a big event?
What would be
How many
the-
people would be at a big event? 30, 50?
I mean, I was just at one over in New Paltz this weekend. I think there was maybe 50 people in
Okay,
one day.
so it's a big event, is what I'm saying.
So the question really is, it's not just shooters, are there vendors and do caterers come? It's really, from
when
our
you get
perspective,
to
the intensity of how the site gets
This
used.
coming weekend, I'm gonna be down in New Jersey, and there's a big event down there, a place called M&M Hunting Preserve, and they will probably, by the way, that facility is enormous. They've got, I think, 5 different complete courses down there. There'll probably be 500 shooters there. When you get to those big events, they do have vendors, but nothing like a club like ours. You don't see vendors coming to little events like ours. Once a year, Orbis has a big function, they call it the Game Fair, and they have vendors. But again, Orbis is a much bigger facility than we are.
So if that's the case, would the condition limiting that or preventing that be acceptable to you?
From vendors, I don't see why not. Maybe bring in a food truck if we were gonna have an event, you know, hot dog or something, but other than that, no. I don't wanna have hungry people running around.
So you're not gonna have, so it's not a spectator sport. Everybody there is
No,
pretty much
it's-
shooting, right?
My wife will once in a while come,
Okay.
you know, other than that, no.
Mike has received a lot of recent complaints from neighbors, maybe not used to hearing the noise. Being out there today, I do agree with Dave that, you know, I'd like the board to get out there prior to moving this any further, not at all meaning to slow down anything. And maybe in parallel to that, you can address some of the comments that Mike and others had and be back on a docket in 2 weeks. I don't know if anyone else on the board has any comments to that, but I would like to make sure that we all get out there.
I have a question. I had asked the last time you were before the board for pictures from each station looking out, so were those provided? Because I didn't see it.
We were actually going to bring them
We
this
didn't
evening.
submit them. I do have them on a laptop. If you want, I could.
If you could send them to Rose, maybe, and then she.
If you send them digitally, then
Electronic,
she'll,
digital?
yeah, if you
Okay.
send them
Digital
digitally, then
format's
she'll
fine.
forward them to us.
Absolutely.
We will make sure we get out there. We're not trying, like I said, we're not trying to slow you down. But maybe you could address in parallel to that and be back in 2
I
weeks.
just ask that you contact me so that I can arrange the,
Right.
and
Sure.
shooting is going on. Eye and ear protection is mandatory. That was another safety issue, by the way. Eye and ear protection. So just sunglasses, okay, and hearing protection.
How do we make arrangements to do that? Who do we see?
I'll give you my card. and,
Okay, I'll just forget.
What's that?
I said, don't announce your phone number. It's-
Right. No, I didn't know there's a webpage or online, you
We
know.
can contact Rose
Yeah,
tomorrow.
you can do it through Rose, right? We can be able to set the thing up for
Yeah.
Rose as well. I think
Okay.
that probably.
Rose
makes
has your
sense.
contact before? Yeah.
Yeah.
She will.
Okay.
Rich Williams with Insight, I'll make sure Rose has it in the morning.
Sure.
So just one last parting thought here, with the noise issue, okay? From last time we heard, it has to do with the fact that this is cross-country, it's going around behind a mountain that used to screen the noise, block the noise, right? These stations are all in place already.
Not the new ones.
The stations are there. These stations are not structures. They can be picked up and be moved by 2 guys. They're not affixed to the ground, but they are where they are. They're not going to be changing dramatically. We might shift an angle for one, for another, but they are where they are.
Okay, I'll rephrase the question. If the noise is an issue, how can that be mitigated?
So, when the board comes out, one, it'll give you a good idea of the terrain and direction of fire and the way the noise carries through the hill. So I think getting out to the site is important, but there are things that have already been implemented, such as sound barriers at 2 of the stations. So when we're out in the field, it's a good chance for us to look at that and talk.
Yeah.
And we are not adverse to building additional sound barriers. We have 2 sound barriers in place. We're not adverse to building additional sound barriers and/or enhancing the 2 that are there. I've talked about putting wings on each one of them and an overhead on the 2 that are there. And there's other stations where we can put sound barriers in to mitigate the noise also.
And I think when you go there, Carl, you'll see that the part that they cleared really doesn't have the impact on the noise. It's really where you get back close to Union Valley Road. I think those are where you, when you're kind of close to these houses where the neighbors are, that's kind of, I think, where the issue is, and that's where their sound barriers are. So I think that's what you're gonna have to do, is probably do something to enhance those sound barriers to make those neighbors comfortable there, right? So we're not getting calls at the town that, you know, there's a...
We're not adverse to doing that.
Right, you wanna be good neighbors, right? Bottom
Right.
line, we wanna be good neighbors, right, so.
Rich, you had another
What-
comment?
Right, so additional disturbance creates the need for a new drawing to be submitted, a review to be looked at. Does it impact your stormwater? Does it impact the land use? Those are the questions that directed to Rich Williams. You're gonna add any disturbance, you need to make sure it's accounted for in your calculations, so, and what you're working on here on the project. So the board needs to know that too, so those are good suggestions, but it impacts what they're looking to do also.
I think the parking will be the biggest disturbance issue, right, I would think, right? Whatever you do with parking,
Well, we have
striping.
to-
Oh, it's there already, I heard.
Well, we don't know how much parking they have and how
Right.
much they need and how much they vary, and so
Right.
that's still something out there in the real world, so.
And I think you're at an advantage in some respects, because there's not like this isn't like a shopping center where we have a count and understand it all. It's really we're gonna rely a lot on your expertise, and it's your facility, right? Ultimately, in the end, you don't wanna have a parking problem, right? You don't wanna have people
Correct.
parking on Union Valley Road, so there's gonna be a certain level of trust here that you're gonna, right, make your facility work.
Right. So, since we're not gonna be able to get 502 spaces, can we get a referral to the?
Let us
ZBA?
first get out there, address some of these other issues with Mike, talk to Mike about the parking.
The official number that you do have before we can send you over.
Right.
And
To give you a variance of,
It's gonna be
So
specific.
you can't kind of tell them what your parking, right, what your parking requirements are.
we
before
need the
can
actual
really
number
deny
so
it,
that
right?
it would be 502 required, 202 provided, 300 variance required from the zoning board.
And that'll
Yeah.
actually help you when you go forward.
Right.
So, just do a little more, we'll do it quick.
Just
2 weeks,
tweak it, and
hopefully.
we'll get there in the next 2 weeks, and we'll make
Yeah.
that commitment, right, that we'll be out there.
Mhm.
Like, I've been there already, but the rest of the group will collectively see it as best they can.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Just a reminder, this is not on taxes. I saw a few people come in and leave, so if anyone's here on taxes, that means across the way. Homeland Towers?
Goes me first. He won't hear.
Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman and members of the board. Robert Gaudioso with the law firm of Snyder & Snyder on behalf of Homeland Towers and New York SMSA Limited Partnership doing business as Verizon Wireless.
Mike?
The applicant proposes to add a 160-foot cell tower, which was reduced by 20 feet, to an existing residential property off Groton Falls Road in Mayapack. Variance is required for the following: 156-6202 only allows 50-foot tall towers, and then 3C allows 50% increase if the board feels, which would be 75 feet allowed. They have 160 feet proposed, so an 85-foot variance is required. The driveway ranges from 12 feet wide to 58 feet wide. Typical two-way aisle widths are 24 feet wide. If the board feels that that is required here, then they need to get a variance for the two-way 24-foot aisle width where it's only 12 feet. The mock-up balloon and crane tests were done on the site. And has this been submitted to the independent consultant for review, and did we get any formal feedback from the independent consultant?
Thank you. Rich?
So as Mike mentioned, the application consists of a 160-foot monopole and a fenced 36 by 100-foot compound for related equipment, along with an access drive. Should be noted that the applicant responded to 3 of the 13 comments provided by this department, Department's September 10th, 2018 memo. So we're going to offer these comments plus some of the ones that were previously given. Referrals appear to be warranted to the Mahopac Falls Fire Department, New York City Department of Environmental Protection, New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. Permits will be required from the New York State DEC for coverage under the General Stormwater Permit, New York City DEP for stream crossing, Town of Carmel Environmental Conservation Board crossing a wetland. The area of disturbance for the work has been provided. It does not account, it appears, based on the drawings, it doesn't appear that it accounts for all the work being performed along the entire length of the driveway. The applicant should note that the threshold is 5,000 square feet, up to an acre, where only erosion and sediment control is needed. All regrading required to accomplish the intended development should be provided. It's unclear from the drawings, provide the full extent of cut and fill. Location of existing and/or proposed are needed for drinking water wells, subsurface septic treatment systems, stormwater management, drainage features, utilities, lighting and associated light spill plan. Because it is crossing over a couple of properties, all erosion and sediment control measures should be provided on the drawings. There's a bunch of details that aren't shown on the drawings. And should any public improvements be deemed necessary, a performance bond will be needed. I have a list of about 23 detailed comments I'm not going to go through with the board. A lot of them touch on just the requirements of Section 156, 62 of the code that still need to be met. Might touch base on it with the 160-foot pole versus the 75-foot which would be required. The area of disturbance must include the utility trench up the entire length of the driveway. The narrative provided on drawing EC1 does not include that portion of the work. EC1 identifies erosion control measures, construction entrance, hay bales, sill sacks, water bars, temporary diversion ditches, and sediment traps. They are not provided on the drawings. Additional details regarding drainage from the proposed driveway should be provided, in particular the area approximate to the neighbor's house on the southwest side of the property. The driveway is approximately 1,000 feet long. When an existing residence downgrade, must provide infiltration of stormwater from the driveway. This could include a combination of infiltration trenches, infiltrations, and rain gardens. There's how electric is being provided to the site, and identify if any easements, rights, if any, to cross other properties are needed for the utilities. I just have, this is more of a comment, the proposed facility is on SP2. The proposed facility is nestled amongst existing mature trees. This note should be explained further, as the area where the tower is proposed is located in an open section of the site. Parking on the site should be addressed. Use of hay bales is discouraged. It's unclear if any fill is being brought to the site, however, it would have to be certified to meet New York State DEC regulations. Additional information should be provided as to deeded access rights to the property as it traverses over private and New York City DEP properties.
Pat. So, Mr. Chairman, just to reiterate where we are in this application, this is an application that the applicant had filed some time ago. They have returned to you and have supplemented their application with some additional materials. Just to be clear, the town's wireless communications ordinance establishes a hierarchy of priorities for the location of these facilities. And where this current facility is proposed is in a Category 5 location, which is a very low priority, which means it's the applicant's burden to document why they can't be in a higher priority location. So in an effort to deal with in an effort to address that, they have submitted some supplemental information, Mr. Chairman, that you should be aware of. First, they did a drive test analysis where they reviewed the gaps in their coverage, and that supplements the facility service plan. Based on your recommendation from the last time they were before you, the town is retained a wireless communications expert to help review that material, which is basically some very sophisticated technical analysis that's beyond the capabilities of any of us to understand. So the material that Mr. Gordioso has submitted for this application has been referred to Mr. Grafe, and he will provide you with a technical review of that information to verify the veracity of what Verizon is telling you. As Mike and Rich indicated, the tower's been lowered from 180 feet to 160 feet. one other piece of information that was submitted was an appraisal report, which is something we have not seen before. And in that report, they have evaluated 13 locations near wireless communication facilities, 4 of which are in the town of Carmel, others are in communities nearby. And what that appraisal report did is it identified of homes that have that are in proximity to a wireless telecommunication tower, have a visible connection to a tower, and it looked at the sales price of those homes compared to homes that don't have a view of the tower. And the interesting finding was that in every instance, homes that had a view of the cell tower had a higher value than homes that don't, in every instance. So that's an interesting conclusion, Mr. Chairman, and I think that's something that we would want to get some additional information to verify how that study was prepared, so we could understand that better. It seems a little unusual that in every instance the values were higher.
I'm sorry, this is being recorded for those trying to watch from TV. If you talk, none of your neighbors and colleagues can hear it, so please hold your thoughts.
The applicant also submitted a visual resource assessment, which was very well done, and it indicates, it provided the assessment of the crane test and the balloon tests. It provided photo simulations of the location of the towers, and it indicates where you'll see the tower. So it was a very well done study, and it shows that the tower is visible in certain locations. The study made a point of indicating that there are no designated scenic visual resources in the vicinity of the tower. In fact, the Putnam County Trailway is a significant scenic resource. It's not a state designated resource, but it's probably the most significant recreational resource in Putnam County. That's not, it's less than it's about 1,000 feet from this site, and it's not clear if the visual impact assessment evaluated all of that trailway, the proximity of that trailway to this tower. If you know the trailway, it heads north and then bends toward this site, and it gets fairly close. So it wasn't clear that the study took that particular location into consideration. That's a significant issue that needs to be addressed. As I indicated, the height of the tower has been lowered, but it still needs a very significant height variance from the ZBA. The applicant has clarified the height of the surrounding trees at about 70 feet. So between 70 and 160 feet, that's the visibility of this tower. The applicant made a point of indicating that there was no equipment shelter on the site. We have regulations governing screening of the equipment shelter. There is in fact equipment cabinets and equipment canopies under which equipment exists. I think that qualifies as the equipment shelter. I think we're playing with semantics in that case. The applicant's putting a fence around this. Whether or not, as the code requires, there needs to be buffering and screening of these things, that's a decision your board will have to make. But I think it's clearly, those things do fall under the control of this. The applicant has also indicated that they are proposing an option, which is the stealth treatment of the tower. And you saw in the visual renderings the comparison between a bare naked tower, so to speak, and the tower disguised as a evergreen tree. And again, because it sticks up above 70 feet, it's an unusual looking evergreen tree as presented. So that's another issue I think the board needs to take into consideration.
Thanks, Pat. Comments from the board?
Yeah, I have a question with regard to general effectiveness and range of these towers. Because there's a tower, there's a monopole here, if I'm not mistaken.
Right there.
There. There's another tower, may not be a monopole, up behind the Peckham Materials, I believe, on the name of the mountain.
That's a full tower on the hill.
Full tower, yeah, okay. And a few others, I don't know exactly the locations, but those are in very close proximity to this location. So I'm a little bit at a loss as to why we need another one right here.
In our application submitted back in August, we did submit a full analysis by Peercon Solutions, a third-party expert that included propagation maps. They showed all the locations of the existing sites. They showed the existing coverage from the existing sites and showed that it didn't cover into this area. They also showed propagation maps of the proposed tower. In addition to that, in February, we performed an actual crane test where we put a crane at the location. We had a test signal, we had a test vehicle, a specially equipped test vehicle, drive the area and actually collect the actual signals of both the existing and the proposed coverage. And we've shown that on the maps. And quite frankly, what it is that the existing sites, they don't necessarily have to be towers. Some are rooftops, some are very low rooftops, some of them are very large towers, but they don't get into the area where this proposed tower is proposed to cover. And that's all detailed in the two different PeerCon reports, which I understand that you're having a third-party engineer take a look at.
Okay. And so to follow on to that, so I assume that the dead spots, one of the dead spots this is trying to address is in part due to the terrain and the characteristics of the surrounding area.
Correct.
Those are consistent for quite a long ways in any direction. So does that mean that we can expect to see a tower every 1 mile radius in the area?
Well, I think if you look at the report that we submitted, we showed the two proposed locations that are in front of the board, and we showed the third location, which we call Glencoma, down further to the south, and we showed another site that was proposed, and actually since this application has been pending, that site's actually gone on air. So we've shown that long-range plan. It's in the maps. It's in the report by PeerCon.
Okay. And then finally, we also have quite a number of low, I don't know, what you'd call them there, but rooftop assessment, sign that's all the way up and down Route 6 because of small localized dead spots. Can you help me understand the benefit or the need for such a high tower here versus covering hotspots with smaller, less obtrusive equipment?
Well, I think there's two different things. I think you hit on the first part, which is that the sites that are on the rooftops are on the rooftops because those are small coverage footprint areas and high capacity, high dense usage along Route 6. Nevertheless, there are other towers, including the one that's right here, the one that's up on the tower overlooking Lake Mayapack. I mean, that's a fairly large lattice tower. So to cover wider area range, you use generally larger infrastructure, which is what's proposed here. There simply aren't those commercial areas through this coverage gap to be able to do those type of low-lying facilities. And what we did include in the PeerCon report was actually a map showing and detailing from a technical basis why we were unable to co-locate or locate in the 4 higher priority locations. Quite frankly, the entire area is residential. So we're in a residential area. We found a large, over 26-acre parcel to be able to place the facility that meets the setbacks. And we're not technically asking for the variance for the height. We're actually asking for the waiver, which is permitted under your code and allowable by the planning board. So I just wanted to touch on that. So it really is dictated by Route 6 has low-lying commercial areas with buildings and high-density usage, and that was the proper installation for those facilities, but in a larger geographic area with significant foliage and significant tree density, a piece of larger infrastructure is necessary.
And if I may, I'm sorry. No, and then it'll be the last one for me, I think. Okay, so the next question has to do with, when we hear about a number of these going up, it has to do with capacity. In other words, I assume that means how many signals, and it's being, they need to add more antennas because you don't have the capacity for, and this isn't my thing, so that's what I understand. Now, does that mean that these towers are trying to cover dead spots? And then can I assume that over time that we're going to go from like 3 or 4 antennas to 30 or 40 on the tower?
No, it doesn't quite work like that. So there are generally 2 reasons why you have a lack of reliable service. You either have a lack of reliable service because you don't have enough signal coverage into an area, or you have a lack of reliable coverage because you have too much capacity on the system. The system cannot handle enough capacity. So in this case, it's just a coverage issue. We haven't shown that this is a capacity issue. This is a coverage issue. On a more densely used area, you might have a capacity issue, and then what you do with the capacity issue is you basically add more cells, more locations, and that's how you handle more capacity. That's the entire purpose of a cellular system. If you had a 50,000 watt radio tower like WHUD on a 400-foot tower over in the town of Phillipstown, you can cover a wide geographic area, but that's a radio tower. That's sending signal out in one direction. With a cellular system, you also have to be able to send a signal back users actually use it. So rather than covering a large geographic area, a cellular system is just that. It's built into cells so that each facility can handle a certain amount of capacity. If it covers too large of an area and too many users, it will have a capacity problem. But in this particular case, it's not a capacity problem, it's a coverage problem. And it's a coverage problem because of what I mentioned before, the location of the surrounding sites, the dense foliage, the tough topography, there's not signal getting into the area.
But it's a carrier coverage problem, so you're Verizon. If I understand it correctly, other carriers can then use that as a co-location. It will already exist, and we could see 30, 40, or, I mean, I see some of these water towers that look like porcupines.
Yeah. Well, so two things. One, your code actually encourages and actually requires that the tower be built for co-location. That's what your code requires. In fact, we submitted back in August, we submitted a co-location commitment letter based on your code provision that says we have to build it for co-location. We also designed the tower for co-location. So if you look at our plans and our structural analysis that we've submitted, we've shown that we can handle the 4 carriers that are operating in the area, both on the tower and at the base of the tower, and we included that in our structural certification. We also included that in our visual renderings. So we showed those 4 different carriers in the visual renderings. Usually they use a maximum of 12 antennas. Usually it's less than that. In most cases it's 6 antennas per carrier, and you have 4 carriers. So that's a more realistic expectation of the number of antennas.
Thank you.
You spoke about a waiver. The board can only waiver 50%. So it's 50 feet, and the 50% would be 75. So anything over 75, you will need a variance.
Yeah, I don't read the code that way. The code has 2 different provisions. It says notwithstanding the foregoing, the board for co-location purposes is permitted to waive the height limit in
Yeah,
totality.
but you have to go to the,
So-
building a new tower. That's the section you have to go to. You're not co-locating yet. You're building a new tower.
No, I'm saying for the purposes of additional future co-location, the board has a broad waiver provision. If the interpretation is that we absolutely need a variance, then I would just suggest that we get that interpretation and we'll go to the zoning board and either appeal it
I'll read the
and/or-
code and
and/or
verify
take
that.
a look at it.
I'll reread it, just to be sure.
Can you explain the lane appraisal? I had the same reaction as Pat when
Sure.
I read through that. Just hard for me to believe that those 13 properties had an increased value of that.
Yeah, and when you say increase, I mean, it's minimal. We're not saying, and the conclusion isn't that the tower is increasing property
Right.
values. In fact, the appraisal report is just simply a report that's collected the data based on a standard methodology that's been upheld numerous times in different court cases, where you look at the property sales of different facilities that have a view and compare it to the property sales without a view. And there's no offset taken, there's no subjective analysis placed on that data. It's the pure data of similar facilities. In this case, we actually used 4 facilities, different types of facilities throughout the town. We used up to another 9 locations throughout the region, including in Westchester, Orange, and Putnam. So we had all different types of variations, all different time frames, so it was, different types of markets. And in every case, the data, the actual objective data, shows that there was no diminution in property values.
One thing that I had requested previously was the drop call data. Have we made any progress on that?
So what we've actually submitted is the actual signal data.
But I asked for drop call data. I mean, it's a separate set of data, and I think that it would be helpful to us if we were able to look at that.
We'll take that under advisement. It's not necessarily, it's not necessarily relevant to whether we have a gap in service or not, but we can certainly take a look at it. And
Why wouldn't it be relevant?
well, first off, it's not required by your code, number 1. Number 2,
No, I'm not saying it's required.
sure.
It's something I asked for
Sure.
that I thought would be helpful to the board to make our decision.
yeah. And what would the standard be, in your opinion, as far as what that decision would be based on?
I don't quite.
So
fully-
what number of drop calls would be relevant?
I don't know. I think if we looked at it and we had a chance to, absorb it, we would come to, everybody may have their own opinion of what's.
I guess maybe a different way to look at it is, you said, rather than drop calls, you have a lack of service. You have what's the word, term you
Gap.
used? The gap in service.
Correct.
What defines a gap in service? If people aren't losing calls, how's there a gap in service?
Sure, so a couple different things. Number 1, the FCC late last year actually came out with an order that is a valid federal order that says we don't necessarily have to prove a gap in service. We just have to prove that a prohibition by a municipality is defined as materially inhibiting our ability to provide service. So we think we've shown that standard clearly by both the drive test data and the propagation maps and the expert reports that we've submitted.
Well, I'll renew my request. And also, have you guys done a no genuine alternative site analysis?
Yes.
And have you given us a copy of it?
Yes, back in August. So we've shown in August, in the PeerCon report, went through the code, went through the priority list, and we explained why
So we
the
give
higher.
it to our experts then?
No, it's been submitted to the planning board. I don't know, I'm not sure about the experts because your code requires that we agree on the scope of the process, and I haven't seen any type of proposal from your experts. I'm not really sure what's been submitted to the expert or not. But the PeerCon report goes through the code, goes through the priority list, and explains why there's no co-location opportunities, why there are no existing structure opportunities, why there are no non-residential zone locations, and why we're proposed on the priority location that we're proposed on.
You know, the PeerCon report addresses alternatives, whether it's satisfactory or not, it's beyond our capabilities.
What, is there any understanding of when that review might be completed by our expert?
We tried to get that answer today. We weren't able to speak to Mr. Graves, so as soon as we know that, we'll pass that on. But he understands that it is, time is of the essence, so.
Yeah, okay.
Did anyone walk the trailway while the balloon, or, I mean, we all drove the location, but we didn't know whether to drive it or walk the trailway. I know I didn't walk the trailway. But
Yeah,
you say
I'm somewhat surprised by this, because back in November, we had submitted the viewshed maps with the proposed locations, and we had specifically asked for additional locations, and I didn't hear that there was a specific request for specific locations on the trailway. I'd have to double check the viewpoints to determine exactly where that was.
Yeah, I
but,
looked through
I'm a little bit surprised that given all the effort that went into the viewshed map and the proposed locations and the time, and, you know, the 6 different balloon tests and the crane test, that now there's a request from an additional viewpoint. That's why we had specifically asked, you know, for that feedback. So we'll take a look at it. I'm not 100% sure on the answer standing here today.
Do we have record of that being submitted to the planning board?
What's that?
Report that you were just referring
Yeah.
to? You should.
Yes, that's
that's
what I indicated earlier, and it was a well-done report, so.
It was in the,
There might be 40 or so photos taken from different areas, different residential areas, different streets.
Yeah, and what we also did is as part of the drive test data, we also did multiple heights, and we were able to lower the tower by 20 feet based on the actual data, by the actual drive test data. And as part of that analysis also, and based on your code and based on prior comments, by lowering the height, we believe we got it into a range to be able to offer the stealth tree, which is one of the options specifically noted in your code. So that's included in the viewshed and the visual resource evaluation as well.
I assume you have data that says, okay, we're at 160 feet. If we went to 80 feet, this is what happens, is how the service deteriorates.
Well, we actually showed it even at 136 feet, it starts to deteriorate. That's the problem.
But deteriorate, so what? I mean, how bad does it deteriorate?
Well,
Do you know
it
anything?
deteriorates to the point where it doesn't remedy
remedy
the gap in service, and it's a material inhibition of our service.
Okay.
They raised, I was there when they were actually raising
Yeah.
it, right?
Yeah.
And there's a transmitter up on top, and they take various, the crane stopped, and then they would take their readings, you know, from
Yeah.
the distance, and then they got to their maximum height and took their distances.
Correct.
A few questions? Sure. So talking a little about elevation, right? So the elevation that the tower sits at now, if you were to go up that hill further, right, that where you are, and you picked it up 50 feet, would the pole be 50 feet shorter?
Not necessarily. So there are 2 functions. One is elevation. The other is getting the antennas above the tree line enough so that there's not so much attenuation at a distance that you lose the coverage of the gap
But
area.
in theory, the trees are going up with the elevation, would be the same ratio, right? And-
No, it's not. No, see, that's exactly the point. What you're saying is it's not the same ratio. So if you're here, if the top of the tower is here and the ground elevation's here, okay, just because you go up here, the tree level will go up, but you can't just shrink the tower 50 feet in comparison for 50 feet. You still have to be a significant distance above the tree line.
Yeah, I listen, those trees are still gonna be whatever, they're 70 feet tall, right? They're 70 feet tall where you're standing here, they're 70 feet tall here.
Exactly.
You're still gonna put that that tower up, you're gonna pick up that elevation, right?
Yeah, but the point is though, if.
You're higher
if-
in the air.
If you're at 160 feet, and when we say 70-foot tree line, that's what's on the plans. I mean, that's obviously a generalization, right? Some trees a little taller, some trees a little shorter. I think that's a good rough estimate for the tree line. So if you're that distance above the tree line, if you go up in elevation, you might be able to lower the tower, but you don't necessarily lower it 1 foot for 1 foot of additional ground elevation. It's something we can certainly look at a particular location, but I can't stand here and tell you that it would be a 1 foot for a 1 foot decrease.
But wouldn't it make more sense on this one to bring it up the hill further so you can shorten the tower?
Well, I think that there are always benefits and there's always detriments. So I heard comments today, and I look forward to seeing the actual copy of the comments. This is an existing access drive, so the comments about a proposed access drive, this is an existing access drive, and the amount of tree removal, I think, is 3, okay? And the amount of ground disturbance is minimal. So when you go place a tower someplace up a hill and you create other potential environmental impacts, that also has to be considered. Tree
But I think
grading.
that's
Sure.
right, that's a balance you gotta take. If we get a shorter tower and we gotta disturb some trees, I think in general, people would probably be happier with that as opposed to, a tree this thing is sticking way up. So I think you're right, it's what you have to consider.
Yeah.
Right, that's all I'm saying. And my question to you is, Mike, on the road, you said the road is, has different widths, right?
12 to 50
So,
something feet. Right.
so can you clarify what that means? So what, they have to have a 24-foot road to get into this thing? Is
No.
that what we're saying?
No.
I'm asking that guy.
A two-way aisle at a shopping center would be 24 feet.
Is that the requirement for this?
That's up to you to determine. That's why I asked it
Yeah.
of this board.
Yeah, and
This
just-
is not a commercial site. This is a residential site with a commercial use on it.
You're going through several residence driveways.
Yeah, I've been there. I'm just curious what the code says. What is the requirement for this?
There is not a written
There's no written
requirement
requirement for a road to get to a
That's
cell
why it's for the
tower?
board, and my opinion would be leave it as residential as possible. There are spots where they can pass each other. If a truck's coming out, they can pull off and the truck get past, but that's up to the board to.
So there's no code requirement that says it has to be like an aisle, has to be 24 feet. It's really kinda.
That's correct.
And then I guess my question for you guys is on this road, is the plan, I believe it is to pave the whole road all the way up?
No, it's to use the existing road.
But are we gonna pave that road or we're gonna leave it dirt?
No, we're proposing to leave the road the way it is. There's one spot that was mentioned to us that there might have been a washout. It's not our cause, but we did note in our submission that we'd be happy to try and address that
So you're not
washout
gonna do any
location.
additional pavement?
We're not proposing to pave the road, correct?
Right, so no additional pavement. We're gonna leave the road pretty much the way it is?
Yeah,
Is
and
that
it's an unmanned facility, so
I understand.
it gets very infrequent maintenance visits, and we did submit the deeds, and we did submit the easements, and that's all part of the record, and we do have proper access to the property.
So now, back to your appraisal a little bit, just talk about the appraisal for a second, right?
Sure.
So you did this appraisal, which is kind of this broad-based, for lack of a better term, a shotgun kind of approach to the appraisal. And I would ask this more to our consultants than you guys. Would it be fair to ask these guys, listen, we know now from your visual impact study, right, where this tower is gonna be. We know what homes it's gonna impact. Could we go back and now appraise, have some expert come in, we have the applicant pay for an expert to do appraisals on the homes based on the pictures and not the pictures? Is
Yeah,
that a possible thing to do?
I would like to
Let me-
respond, I would like to
let me have the
respond to that, because it's
consultant.
important,
You
because.
can commit it, let me just
Sure.
ask my consultant first.
So that's a rather unprecedented request for us to make.
But they introduced this appraisal, we didn't.
So that's
So I
absolutely
think,
right.
is that fair for us to say, listen, you guys hire an appraisal of our choice to come out and look, now we know where it's gonna be, we know what we're looking at. It doesn't have to be
But what they
blanket.
did in their study, Dave, is they took recent sales of those homes. The homes around this tower may not have sold recently, so was the sale price of the home in 1965, does that mean anything at this point? What you'd have to do is ask the appraiser to value the property today. And that's a significant undertaking, and I don't think we've ever done that before. But I'd like to hear what Mr. Gordioso says to
Yeah,
that.
I think you're a planning board that by law, both town, state, and federal, you're supposed to look at an application and review an application. And under federal law, and really even under state law, you decide the application based on substantial evidence in the record. I don't believe there's any precedent, I don't believe there's any authority for the board to create its own evidence. So if someone wants to submit evidence, if you want to have someone review, as you're doing with our RF expert report, because it's beyond your technical capabilities in-house, I think that's fair. I think to say that you're going to create a new piece of evidence and make the applicant pay for it, I think that's beyond your
but-
authority.
but
But
again-
more importantly, I think that the report that we submitted is pure data, okay? It's pure data. If you want to have someone check the data, I don't think we would object to that.
Absolutely verifying that
Okay.
report, evaluating that report is something you have total control over that. You can
And-
certainly do that.
And the
Yeah, I get
courts
that.
have
They've submitted
upheld that methodology, okay? The courts have upheld that methodology multiple times.
Yeah, I have a hard time with that being a study, right? Again, a report I could live with. The word study in there kind of throws me a little bit. I don't believe that's a study at all.
Well, it's
That's just-
pure data.
That's all it is, a bunch of data, you know.
Well, it's not a bunch of data. I mean, it's relevant data based on a methodology that's been
It's a bunch of data,
upheld.
there's a lot of data there,
Yeah.
right? And it is, you know, you don't know condition of homes, you know anything, right? It really is, it's all kind of, it's just, again, it's a shotgun approach. We know what our visual impact is now, right? We know where this tower is gonna be. We know who's gonna see it from where. We could probably do a much better job, I would think. Again, I'm not an expert appraiser, and I'm not
if
sure if
I-
that's a possibility. I'm just throwing it out there, right? I'm just throwing ideas.
Dave, I see your point, but I think, I also see the point here is, that, you know, you buy a house, they do comps, right? They go around and look for, in the area, similar homes, similar circumstances, and so forth. So I think in effect, the study that they've presented is what we would expect. You're not gonna look at that specific home and say to someone, okay, if there was a tower in the backyard or there wasn't, what would you pay for the house? That, you're doing
Yeah,
comps, is sort of what.
that's what I was kind of asking the experts. Is there
Yeah, I don't-
precedence on this?
You know what's
I-
interesting
I
here-
understand the
Difficult to
complications,
do.
trust me, I do.
What is interesting coincidence is we do have, those homes were assessed 2 years or so ago.
That's right.
So we have recent data of everyone's,
That's something I'll ask you to
Entire
consider.
town.
It's
So
way out- it's way over
it's something
my
for us to
state grade, it's just
talk
something that
about.
you can
Yeah.
think about.
I think that's right.
Just so that the record is clear, you've submitted evidence to the board with respect to this report. They have the right to question the methodology that was submitted in that report and question the conclusions that were drawn as a result. So that's their purpose. So I just don't want to get far afield here with respect to what the board is looking to do. I think they're just peeking behind the curtain, if you will, of the appraisal report. The means by which they choose to do it could be utilization of the recent town revaluation, any other data that the assessor's office has. They have the right to do that. So I just want to.
Yeah, I think that's a
That's what
different
I-
characterization than having the applicant pay for a third-party appraiser to go out.
Right, that's why I was trying to
Yeah.
bring it back to where we were.
But that's why my question was to you guys, not really to the applicant, it's to you guys. Just food for thought, right? They put this out there, is there a way to kind of, to substantiate that report? I guess that's where I was going with it. Now, we can do better than that, because again, the report is kind of a blanket report. We know specifically where this thing is gonna land now, right? So that was only my point. I only got a couple more things. So, again, I'm a layman at this, right? I'm just a general contractor doing the best I can, so bear with me. But I do believe the technology, right, in general, right, this technology in cell towers and in communication is evolving relatively quickly. Is there, you know, is this technology, again, is there a way to, you know, pick the signal up here and send it down, or pick the signal up there and send it up the road to this tower? Is there something low or small that we could do that, put on telephone poles?
No.
Again, I'm just
So what you
reaching out
just
for
described
ideas.
is a repeater system, and the problem with a repeater system is you're not creating new signal, which means you don't have capacity in that area. So then you're basically taking an existing site, you're repeating the signal there, and then that site has to cover the capacity of the location it's covering plus the new location. So that's why you don't do repeaters in that regard.
But I thought we didn't really have a capacity issue. Our thing was a, if I'm understanding it right, ours was a
No, but you
signal
would be
issue, right?
creating a capacity issue. You would
Right.
be creating that capacity
Because you have
issue.
to bring that signal up here, and it
Correct.
has to come back, and there's not enough storage here.
Correct.
Even if we put a second tower here?
Correct, because you still have to get the signal into the wide geographic area with the tough topography and all the trees that we're trying to cover.
Okay, and then I guess my next piece on this thing, as this technology advances, and here's what I do believe this, I think it's just like anything, right? Right now, these towers are everywhere, and they seem like they're gonna be everywhere, and they're gonna keep going. My guess is, as time goes on, that these towers will become obsolete. I do believe that as time goes on. It may not, you know, might not be 5 years now, for 10 years from now, but at some point, they're gonna be obsolete. So is there a method when these towers are obsolete to take them down?
Yeah,
Is there a backdoor in these things? If they're not used, if they come off, they get restored?
The town board adopted 2 years ago. It includes the requirement for them to post a bond that when the tower is obsolete, it's removed at their expense, and if they don't do it, we call in the bond and we spend their money to remove the facility.
Okay, to further that, if I may, how does one and who determines when it becomes obsolete?
Yeah, it's a Yeah, ultimately, the town board has the decision, but it's their
They're just gonna be
technology.
using it, right?
So the one good news, the piece about that, it is regulated by the federal government, so the use of the tower is overseen by a regulatory agency, so we can get that data.
I'm done. Thank you.
Other thoughts from the board?
So where are we at? What's the status now?
Well,
What's the,
I think it was Rich that said there were 23 or so comments. Yeah, I personally like to, I mean, there's a whole booklet on comments here. I personally like them to clear those up and then
Yeah,
come
we'd-
back to it.
We'd respectfully, given the May 31st shot clock deadline at this stage, we'd respectfully ask that the public hearing be set so we can get the input from the public, so if there are additional comments, we could start to address those as well. There is a shot clock that we've already extended out to May 31st, and we think it would be appropriate for next month to at least start to get the public's input.
My suggestion would be if, I think there are additional comments that the consultants raised tonight that are going to require the board getting answers to. Secondly, we've now submitted this to our expert for their review, and I don't see why we can't put this on. I don't think, again, it's up to the chairman. I don't think it's right for a public hearing yet. I think the public will have an opportunity, but there's still too many questions unanswered before the public should get the opportunity, because we're going to be going back over the same ground.
But what about the variance? Don't we have to go to variance?
They also need that.
There's the,
Oh, you're challenging that, so we don't really know that yet. Okay.
I think we first need to see the report from our consultant.
and we've,
Absolutely.
we've
The public
directed,
has a right to have that fully vetted by our experts, so.
That's right, so your policy on any application is to not set the public hearing until you have
They're
everything
just-
in place, and
Correct.
that's the application you're willing to consider. And you're
we've
not
had
there
people
yet.
in front of us with a third of this amount of comments. There's just too many, it needs
Yeah,
to be clear up. We can get our technical,
Again, my only comment to that would be, quite frankly, on September 12th, you resolved to hire the consultant. We still don't have a report. Many of these comments seem misplaced in that it's an existing access drive. If there's going to be a slight relocation on the property, I don't see the need to start designing stormwater management infrastructure if we're still talking about where the tower is going to be on the property, which I think is going to be in large part dictated by some of the public comments and the board's feedback. To get new comments, we'll certainly address them, but I think we've substantially addressed the prior comments and put forth an application that we believe is complete under the statute. So I don't see the downside of setting the public hearing. If the board deems otherwise, just note my request for the record, that's all.
Yeah, and
Mr.
one
Gaudioso,
advan-
I will beg to differ with the stormwater. Those are not town's regulations or state regulations. They are required, 5,000 square foot of disturbance. You're in the New York City DEP watershed. That is an issue that needs to be addressed. Every application that comes through this board, every site plan, every planning application needs to meet that requirement. That's not the town's.
I know, I heard a 500,000 cubic yard application earlier tonight that got a public hearing set that I suspect is probably, has some more stormwater issues than perhaps this 36.
500,000 cubic yards.
500 cubic yards, I'm sorry.
so, but that's,
So, I appreciate that, I appreciate
We're not
that.
talking about that application.
I know, but
Yeah.
I am.
You also have issues with the New York City DEP. You're crossing over, you have a stream crossing permit that is required from them, or you at least need to determine that. Again, that's not my determination of the town's. That's New York City DEP. It's their stream, you're crossing over, you're putting in utilities there, and you're doing disturbance. You have a permit that is needed, either a wetlands permit from the state and/or the Environmental Conservation Board, because you're crossing over a wetlands. These are issues that are important and that need to be addressed.
You just said that's a permit we will deal if we need it with the DEP. If this board, I believe, declared its intent to be lead agency back in September 12th, I'm not sure where that process stands, but I think it's important to have that clarified this evening. Stormwater issues, we appreciate them. The engineering issues, we certainly appreciate them. They're easily addressable with a unmanned facility. Doesn't require wastewater, doesn't require sanitary sewers. It's an unmanned facility on a 3,600 square foot parcel, so on a 26-acre property.
And I respect your comment, you haven't seen mine. What I was saying is you need to show where the existing septic systems are over there. I have no idea if you're going anywhere near them, anywhere near any of the water lines that are there. That was what the comment was meant to be. I know that you're not gonna have wastewater or water on this property. So, but again, I respectfully say that to you because you haven't seen my comments, you only heard me read through them earlier, so.
I'm not ready to send this on to a public hearing, so we need to address these comments. We can get more time with our technical consultant, then I think we'll be in much better shape as a team.
And we meet every 2 weeks, so if
Yeah.
you get your stuff together, you can back here 2 weeks anyway. It's not like a
Robbie
board
just
that's
said we've
once a
been
month, right?
looking at this since August or September, couple more weeks, you know.
And we're aware of the shot clock date, so we're gonna do our best to promptly process the application.
I appreciate that.
The shot clock day is May 31st, you said?
Correct.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, planning board.
Fun. What?
You can get Huffy and Puffy with you.
I don't mind.
Oh, I know.
I don't mind.
Mr. Chairman?
Sorry, but.
No, I'll offer the, excuse me, meeting is still going on, so could everybody? Ladies and gentlemen. Folks, we haven't closed the meeting yet, so you're welcome to go, but we have to finish up. So please, try to keep it down.
We still have
Thank you.
minutes.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, I'll offer the planning board meeting minutes from the March 27, 2019 meeting.
Second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Dave, is that you?
Give it to Carl.
You got, who was the second? Oh, okay.
What?
Carl was the second.
Oh, yeah, I
He didn't
second.
hear me and I didn't hear you.
All right.
so it's fine. We got 2 seconds on that one.
If that's it, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
And I'll second that one.
All in favor?
Aye.
Meeting adjourned. Thank you.